On today's episode of Sweet Series, we are very excited to have President and Executive Director of the National Landing Bid, Tracy Sayegh Gabriel. Tracy, thank you for joining us today.
It's a pleasure to be here, Matt. I really appreciate it.
So, Sweet Series is a podcast where we interview C-suite executives and entrepreneurs within the commercial real estate industry. And Tracy certainly has a pretty unique story as to how she, started a career and eventually got to be president of the National Landing Bid. So, how we'd like to begin is, Tracy, why don't you tell us a little bit about, where you're from, growing up, family life, et cetera.
So I am a New York City native. I grew up in Manhattan on the 21st floor of an apartment my folks still live in.
Oh, wow.
But I definitely was someone who started off early, I think, being an observer of city life and city form and function. And, I spent a lot of time staring out my window and taking in the city, but also on the street, just being an observer of city life and being really kind of passionate about urban living. And so that was really foundational for me and very exciting, to eventually find a career that would sync up with that budding passion.
Well, yeah, there's certainly not a better city than New York to get that bug. Both my siblings are in New York. My grandparents are from the Bronx and Brooklyn, so certainly have had, and I've also lived in New York, so I've loved the city. And as an observer living in New York, were your parents involved at all in like city planning or politics or real estate or?
No, I think, it's funny. I think I didn't necessarily follow in those footsteps. I think, they were more engaged in finance and the stock market. But for me, policy was the thing that I got the bug for, in addition to urbanism. And I don't know if it was that like early exposure to like kind of social justice issues too, and a passion for not just seeing the beauty in cities, but like also seeing the problems, right? And seeing the things, the inequities, the issues, especially, you can imagine 1980s New York. And so really wanting to figure out how I could be part of making a better place and thinking about the people aspects of urban living. It's definitely, an experiment, right? And the highest form of community is like living in a high density city. But it comes with all that goes with that. And I think I, early on felt strongly about both social justice, but also urban policy. And I think that was more a product of like, maybe some Catholic schooling, maybe just, a general interest and desire to see how I could be a change agent in the future.
And as you were growing up, were there any jobs that you were taking that just added more fuel to the fire to get into this line of work?
I think I was, growing up, I definitely was the kind of entrepreneur who took on any role that came my way, whether it was, early working in like a church rectory for, taking on waitressing and other jobs. I think mostly it was a lot of hats that I got to wear at an early age, but I don't think actually the passion for where I ended up now really came through until I stepped into college and the opportunity to live in a different city and then actually have the comparisons and start to really think critically about what the differences were, but in my case, between DC and New York City. And then I also got really passionate about travel as early as undergrad. And so that was another expression of, you know, I think of where I ended up with in the like kind of urbanism and real estate realm is sort of taking in new places through travel. So I got to see that through in my undergrad years.
So leading to undergrad, obviously George Washington University is where you attended. And what about DC? I guess at that point of your life, you're probably looking at various universities, other cities to, attend. What was it about GW and DC that eventually led you to come here?
Well, I think in part it was access, right? So I ended up as a political science major and or really international affairs is where I ended up. But I came in at poli-sci, and that access to, getting to intern on the Hill and getting really engaged in policy in a meaningful level, it's unparalleled what DC offers, and the idea that you're not just a student, but you're kind of a student of government too while
Mm-hmm.
you're there. And so that was really attractive to me. And also is in terms of cities, DC struck me as like the scale and maybe I didn't have the word for it then, but the livability and the kind of the green within it was really desirable. Because as much as I love New York, I think I was looking for a little bit of a counterpoint to that as well.
Yeah. Now, as someone who grew up in the DC area, I mean, it's just pretty remarkable to see the change that not only DC's gone through, but even, Bethesda and Rockville
Yeah.
and obviously Crystal City and everywhere else, Alexandria. I mean, it really, over the past, call it 30 years, it's been quite the transformation. So once you were finished with MIT, you then moved to San Francisco for a couple years. Is that correct? You were at
Um,
Reuters?
I actually did San Francisco right before I went
Okay.
to MIT. So I was
Okay.
doing a little bit. It was my hiatus years of focusing on um, on really international business and
Okay.
marketing. And what I found was, I again, the passion for policy and place was missing from that ingredients. But it was really helpful for me because that was a period of time where I was really focused on truly private sector activities. And so I think in terms of gaining great business skills that I could then apply to a profession that was more public sector centric was also helpful in helping to make sure that I knew that I needed to go back to school in order to get more aligned with where my passion was.
Got it. Great.
Yeah,
And then you moved back to New York
exactly.
and you were part of the NYC Economic Development team.
Yeah, so I was at the New York City Economic Development Corporation, EDC, and there I got the opportunity to focus on what were really special projects for the city. It
Mm-hmm.
was that Bloomberg era of mega project development, take
Okay.
it or leave it. So a lot of my work was focused on looking at large scale transformations of districts, and my portfolio was Queens, so lots of major central business districts in Queens, but it was always at the intersection of planning, of real estate, of public infrastructure, of parks, and a lot of these places where we were looking at all these in tandem, as well as affordable housing. It was that perfect intersection of planning, real estate, and public infrastructure that I think was about neighborhood building that has become a through line in my career.
We're done with GW, and then you decide, I'm just going to go to MIT. Is that right?
Eventually,
Eventually.
I had a little detour. Was a Fulbright scholar in Damascus, Syria, where I also was very much thinking about economic development
Hmm.
in that context and studying gender and economic development. But when I came back, I was trying to look for a way to fuse my interest in policy with something that was, a profession that was going to be really tangible. And when I stumbled upon urban planning, it's where I realized I could take all the things I really cared about in terms of, people and urban policy, and then the physical built environment, and that there was actually a profession called urban planning. And the idea of actually even self-identifying as a planner really appealed to me. It was a mindset, even though it wasn't a super technical skill set, it was a mindset that I was really excited to apply to, to the work. So that brought me to MIT.
So Syria, you got to what was your day to day like in Syria, and what were some of the, what were some things that you learned while over there? Obviously, their policy is completely different than ours, and when you were talking about gender, the way they look at men, women is obviously different than how they do here. So, tell me a little bit more about that.
Well, I mean, the Fulbright program is such a phenomenal one because it's really about, cultural immersion and exchange and understanding. I myself am a Syrian American, so that was an added bonus for me to experience it from academic standpoint. And so for me, I think it was an exercise in also how to be a researcher, how to take in, to ask critical questions and then seek thorough answers. But I think as the seed that it planted in me in my day to day was I felt like my role was to really get deeply vested into talking to people. And so that meant I got to spend a lot of my day going around the city. And I actually spent a good deal of my time in the old city. And I think, the experience of layers, I mean, it is the oldest continuously inhabited city in the world. So you talk about a place, really, there and Aleppo are both vie for that title, but you can imagine the richness and the layers, and you're thinking about the built environment, thinking about, the cultural layering that comes in over time. So I think that was another one of those spaces where I was very much inspired by the built environment there, and what I got to, explore and understand.
I'm sure it was quite the experience. And within National Landing, you guys have 12% of all of Arlington County's affordable housing, about 1,100 units. Is there a plan to add more affordable housing as some of these new projects deliver, as far as the bridge, and all the other mass transit that's going underway? How is that in your planning right now?
Absolutely. So I think you ask a really great question. When you're looking at this much growth, how do you ensure it's equitable development? How do you ensure it's sustainable development? And certainly affordable housing is a huge piece of that equation. As you know, there's been a affordable housing crisis in our region, if not all over the country, but certainly in our region. And and some concerns amongst folks that Amazon and their presence could exacerbate that. And so I think we're very fortunate that we have really all stakeholders working together to advance a vision for more affordable housing. And so that comes on a policy level with the Arlington County framing targets that include a significant increase in affordable housing for our district. And how do you realize that? We're seeing that through, incrementally through new development in our area where there's set-asides for affordable housing, either on-site or off-site. Something unique with Arlington is that even office development can incur a affordable housing set aside. So from Met Park alone, there was $20 million in affordable housing funding that Amazon provided as part of their phase 1 development, even though it was a 100% office project. So that is a unique and additional aspect. We also have the Washington Housing Conservancy, which has been an effort of the Washington Housing Initiative across a number of private sector players who are saying we need to preserve the affordable housing or really the market rate affordable housing that we have in naturally occurring affordable housing in our area. And through the Washington Housing Conservancy and Amazon's own, equity fund for housing, we were able to actually see the creation of what will be up to probably 1,200 units of affordable housing on just one site at the Crystal House, between the existing buildings and potential infill development. Wow. There, which is incredible. And that's really a block from their phase one of their project. So you're talking about really delivering affordable housing and proximity to economic opportunity. So if we really want to grow, it's like these are the places of opportunity. We need affordable housing, and it's going to take every player, the nonprofits, the public sector making a priority, and then private sector also stepping up. And we're lucky to have folks like Amazon putting their money behind investing in affordable housing, not just in National Landing, but throughout the region.
Wow, that's great. You really lit up when we started talking about that, so I can tell it's a passion of yours to discuss
absolutely.
That. And can you talk about maybe some of the people you worked with there, and how they, I guess, helped shape you to eventually become president of the BID, and maybe some lessons learned. And I always think it's interesting to not only know about lessons learning, positive ones, but negative lessons. Like maybe you're in this position, you're like, man, I wish my boss would be doing this instead of this. And maybe that's something that you've thought on, as you've grown into your career.
Well, I think one of the things I learned in such a large, ambitious projects of such a public and impactful scale is that you really can't do anything alone, right? Everything requires an incredible amount of collaboration. You need to share the, you need to share all of facets of the work, and certainly the credit goes around to everyone. So I've discovered that, yes, things always take longer than you expect, especially on ambitious projects, but so many hands need to touch that. So one of the things you learn is, relationships and matter a ton in terms of the ability to get things done. And then, creating space for really interagency and intergroup dynamics is incredibly important. And one of the things I know, you said, what are, challenging moments? I think what I learned in that space is that, and then subsequently when I was in DC government, is, those very difficult times where you're faced with, adversity and you take a painful fall. I think it's really helpful to remember that those are the spaces you actually grow in.
Yeah.
That's where the most growth takes place. When you're on a high and you're riding high, you're not doing the same level of work and care and reflection that you do when you hit those grounding moments. And so if you can, sometimes it may take a long time before the light comes in after that, but I think that growth that occurs is the silver lining of every, difficult bump in the road.
Yeah, I'm glad you actually said that, because in my, I want to say in my intro to this Sweet series, I talk about there's been way more failures than wins, right? So only people see the news clippings when there's a win, but
Yes.
You probably had 10 losses before you got to that win. So okay, so you were at the NYC Economic Development Corporation. Now you come back to DC. Tell me about how and why you left, New York, now to come back to DC.
Right. So, well, I went I came really actually as a family opportunity. My husband had a role, he's a landscape architect, to be the national design director at GSA. And that was under the Obama administration. It was very exciting. So, we decided to take the leap with two young children, very young at the time. That was about 10 years ago. And revisit a city that I knew, quite honestly, as you said, at the outset, a very different juncture, right? So DC was experiencing a real boom in growth and in demographic change. And for me, it was an exciting opportunity to revisit the city. And at that juncture, as head of neighborhood planning at the DC Office of Planning. So actually, in some ways, this was going back to my roots. When I was at EDC. It was really about that, like I said, that collaboration, that coordination across agencies, big picture thinking. But even before that, I had a stint as a consultant doing a lot of community-based planning, really direct engagement with community, which is not always the easiest job, but I got to go back to do that again, and to be, looking at a host of neighborhoods and bringing new plans to those areas at a time where, quite honestly, there needed to be a community conversation around what the vision was for the future and how do you ensure inclusive growth. So it was a great challenge. Also, it was a wonderful opportunity to really deeply know Washington, D.C., right? By having to be responsible across the entire district around neighborhood planning, it gave me a window into the city that was kind of unparalleled in terms of a deep knowledge of different communities.
So, could you give an example? You're at the office and you're like, okay, let's talk about the Shaw neighborhood and how we're gonna, bring business here. We're gonna change, the culture. Can you give like just some high level, like how does that discussion even begin, and like who's involved with all of that?
Well, I think that it's a great question. Like, how do you approach
This? Yeah.
planning for a place? And
Right.
I think one of the hallmarks of good planning is actually planning for a great process. So you don't need to know all the answers up front. And in fact, you shouldn't have your desired outcomes. You might have some goals, but it's really to frame a process where you can get to a point where there's a common vision, and then the recommendations to get there. So building a process that involves both great engagement with the community and other stakeholders, but also the data-driven kind of solutions that you want. So how do you do all the analysis that you need to for place on transportation, on growth, on just really understanding retail. So having critical analysis and data-driven solutions, and then again thinking about best practices across the nation and what you want to bring to bear there, and again getting that common vision, and somehow in all that over the course of usually a year, you can arrive at a place that hopefully is a vision that can be a shared one.
That's a good segue into you then coming over to National Landing in 2018. And obviously, for everyone who hopefully will be listening to this, Amazon, that's been the big news. And I think what you just talked about is your framework for having a plan, and you're not going to have all the answers on day one. So can you maybe talk a little bit about when either Amazon engaged National Landing or how that process began, and just maybe a little bit about the timeline of that and eventually you guys winning Amazon HQ too?
Right. Well, actually, there is a really strong connection from our last conversation that describes maybe part of the why National Landing became such an attractive place for Amazon to land, is really good planning. So this area has had if listeners don't know, National Landing is the largest downtown in Virginia. It's Crystal City, Pentagon City, and Potomac Yard neighborhoods in Arlington, Virginia, but right across the river from DC. And it is one of the most remarkable urban transformations probably underway in the region, if not the nation. But that great planning foundation, at a time where there was some disinvestment in this area, there was a plan for how are we going to grow, how much, and those plans had about 20 million square feet of development capacity baked into those, and the space for the entitlements you would want in order to move forward. So that kind of community vision around growth was really, I think, an attractive thing. Another thing is we have, an incredible bones of a transportation network. And if you know anything right about commercial real estate today, I mean, you're really competing on place and accessibility. And so this kind of the strong mix of everything from, bus rapid transit to several metro stations to an airport is unparalleled. So all those ingredients were the fundamentals. In terms of when did Amazon become interested in the process, I know that has been poured over by many stakeholders because, again, going back to my first comment, it takes a ton of people to make big things happen. So there are numerous stakeholders engaged in really drawing Amazon to this area, one of which is our key largest property owner, JBG Smith, which actually really had a great vision for the way we could transform place here and bring that 21st century urban sensibility to our district and a quite large portfolio to leverage. But I walked into this role just 3 to 4 months before Amazon announced. So it was we were hopeful. We knew we had the fundamentals. We knew they were interested. But it wasn't until the definitive moment in November of 2018 that we landed it. And so, but the way I framed it too was like someone with my background who's been thinking about how do you transform neighborhoods? How do you build and have inclusive growth? How can you engage community and be a great steward of growth? It all really intersected well with the opportunity to lead the bid at a time of massive transformation.
So I know we're running out on a little bit of time, and before I get to my final 3 questions, which I had shared with you, if someone who is starting their career in urban planning, are there certain network groups that these people should try to join just so they can start having more of a more relationships within that community?
Yeah, I think that the American Planning Association, APA, and their local chapters is a great place to get connected into programming and networking and people. Also, all the universities and there that have urban planning programs also have great networks and programming. I think Urban Land Institute, ULI, is that great crossover area between real estate and planning. As a even mid-career, I always recommend the Leadership Institute and the opportunity to really invest in your local network and grow opportunities. So those are really good places to start. And there's also a lot of online publications that can be enriching in terms of figuring out your career direction.
Great. Well, I hope, for the future listeners, I hope they definitely look into joining some of those organizations. With that being said, Tracy, can you let the audience know 3 of your favorite restaurants at National Landing?
Yeah. Well, I will say one of the things we are most excited about is this slew of new restaurants and retail that's coming to our area. I think we're expected to triple, if not quadruple, the amount, and we'll be seeing at street level. So most of our greatest excitement is about what's to come. And Syria is a new concept that's coming next year It's if you know 7 Reasons in DC, it's
Oh, yeah.
that same group. So that's going to be an exciting addition with indoor and outdoor space, and unique menu from breakfast to dinner. And so we're very much looking forward to that, especially since it's right next to my office. But I also am someone who loves a good taco. So so if I'm going to grab some Mexican, I'll either be going to Combi right on Crystal Drive, or headed to Los Tios on 23rd Street. But I'd be remiss of saying where I would want to end my evening, and that's at Freddy's Beach Bar. It's our local institution. It's been a beacon for the LGBTQ plus community for many years, and it's super fun.
Cool. And at one of these great restaurants, bars, if you could have 3 people, from any time in history, that are alive, who's at the table with you?
So if we are at Freddy's for a good time, I'm gonna surround myself by wise women, and so I think I would summon RGB back for a chat, and certainly Michelle Obama at the table, and probably one of a slew of female performers, because when you go to Freddy's, you have to end the evening with some karaoke. So, so I'd love to belt it out with the best.
Okay. Maybe like some Beyonce or
yeah, exactly.
Okay. That's great. And if you weren't, being an urban planner, working in real estate, what would be another sort of dream job for you?
I think I was someone, you asked me in terms of growing up, and certainly there was so much passion around cities and cityscapes, but that was latent at that time. And at that time I was really into the performing arts. So dancing, acting. So I think if you were to give me my dream parachute into another profession, it would be acting.
Cool. That's great. And what about a favorite movie? Can we?
Ooh, that's a tough call. I hate to play favorites when it comes to movies, but it's generally usually a foreign flick because I always enjoy that.
Okay. All right. Well, I just want to thank you again for your time today. It was really just a pleasure getting to know you, listening to your story, and sharing your wisdom for other people getting into their professional careers. So I just want to thank you again. It's fun.
Thank you so much, Matthew. Appreciate it.
And if you like what you've heard and want to discuss your office space needs, please connect with me on LinkedIn, which is Matthew S. Goldberg on LinkedIn, and schedule a meeting through my Calendly link.